Hey guys, welcome back to Tour Level Golf. Today we will be doing a public golf course tour and review of the Northern Virginia area. So anything that will sit on the Virginia side of DC, within about 20 miles of it. So we will start off with Augustine Golf Club. So Augustine is probably the furthest south golf course on this list. So it sits just north of Stafford, Virginia. Probably about a 35 or so minute drive actually from the city if there isn't any traffic. It is a good golf course, I would consider it. It sits kind of back in the woods, away from a lot of things. There is a little neighborhood around it, but a lot of the houses on the course sit pretty far away from the actual fairways. Along with that, it does have some really good architecture. There are a lot of parts of the fairways where maybe the fair will be wide at the start, really narrow in one section, then wide again. So you can kind of play certain tee shots, play a little more aggressive if you want to, but it's really good architecture. A lot of hills, a lot of elevation, and a ton of water, especially on the front nine. The one downside of this course, I would say, outside of the distance from a lot of the other places, is conditions will fluctuate throughout the year. I've seen it in really good shape, I've seen it in really bad shape. But overall, great layout, conditions-wise, can be hit or miss though. Next, we're looking at Bristol Manor Golf Club. So Bristol Manor is probably the closest to linked style golf you'll get in this area. So it's very flat, although a lot of the fairways will have a lot of mounding all through the rough and through the short grass as well. So even though, of course, from a visual looks flat, a lot of the lies aren't. So when it does get windy, it can play really challenging, really interesting, because it is fairly open on a lot of sections of the course. There are some lakes and water features out there, but for the most part, it's fairly wide open outside of maybe some tall fescue occasionally. It is a really good deal compared to some of the other courses in the area as well. So because it does kind of sit in Bristol, Virginia, a little bit close to Manassas, it does kind of have a little bit lower price point than some of the other ones really close to the city. For that, we're looking at Bull Run Golf Club. So Bull Run Golf Club sits up on Bull Run Mountain partially, so it does actually play to a lot of elevation changes. A lot of amateur events are held there, so a lot of like amateur tours make that stop because it is consistently in good shape. So anytime that you're in the area, it's a good place to play. It is a little bit more on the expensive side compared to some of the other courses, but it's probably one of the best designed courses in that specific area. It does play over 7,000 yards if you want it to, and the practice facility is awesome. Huge chipping green, a huge putting green, and really good range. After that, we'll look at Burke Lake Golf Center. So Burke Lake Golf Center sits in Burke, Virginia, real close to Fairfax. It is probably the best practice facility on this list for a lot of people in that area. It has a chipping area, it has a big putting green, and it is a 18-hole par 3 course. They don't allow carts on the course at all, so you do have to walk. They do allow push carts, and they do rent push carts as well. Though, like I said, if you're not into walking, especially in the summer, probably stay away. But practice facility is pretty good, and then it actually has a brand new 2-tier driving range, so you can hit off the top level, and the bottom level actually in the winter will have heaters and lights, so it'll stay open sometimes till 10 p.m. at night during the season. Biggest thing with this, it is very hit or miss on conditions, very similar to Augustine. So the greens do get a lot of play. So even though the course is maintained fairly well, ton of ball marks on the greens usually. It sits right in the middle of a very populated area, so it does get beat up a little bit throughout the year. Next one is Forest Greens Golf Club. I will be a little biased on this. I used to be the head professional of this course when I used to live up in that area. Having said that, I do think it is still one of the best value courses in the area. It does sit in Triangle, just south of Woodbridge, so similar to some of these, it's a little bit further away from a lot of the populated areas, probably about 30 minutes away from the city, right off of I-95. So if you are traveling from a distance, let's say you're traveling south, it's really easy to just pull off the highway and get right to the course. And usually, honestly, the greens fees range anywhere from $30 to like $60. It's not expensive, but it is a great layout. Plays over 7,000 from the bat tees, lots of good elevation changes, and there are no houses or buildings on the course, just kind of sits back in the woods. So it is a beautiful course to go play. Conditions are usually really good. They have a very small maintenance staff. They always have, but they keep the whole course in great shape. Greendale Golf Course. Actually, probably the flip side of Forest Greens. So Greendale Golf Course sits in a very populated area just outside of DC. Sits in Alexandria, right off of Telegraph Road and Van Dorn Street. The location is why it's so busy and so expensive. So the course itself is very flat. Not really a lot of undulation to the fairways, and a lot of the holes tend to just go straight up and straight back. There is a big pond out there, so a little bit of water hazard on a couple holes, but for the most part, it's a fairly boring layout. It does have a putting green, does have a chipping green, and the back nine does have a little bit more elevation change, just not a ton. It's super convenient if they're in the area. We played it all the time just because it was right down the street from one of the teaching facilities I was at. But like I said, price tag, it can be sometimes $80 to play just because it's so busy and they know they can make that money. So like I said, I'd probably stay away, especially on the weekends, because it's gonna be expensive and crowded. So next one, Herndon Centennial Golf Club. Very similar in the sense that it's in a very populated area in the middle of Herndon, but is much better architecture. So it's a shorter course, probably playing 6,200, 6,300 from the back tees, but a lot of risk reward holes, a lot of very sharp dog legs that a lot of big hitters can kind of take you over the corner, or you don't really even need that. You don't need driver throughout the entire course. Still very similar in the sense that it's fairly flat compared to a lot of the other ones in the area, but great practice facility, good range, good chipping area, good putting green. Just like I said, it stays busy as well, and typically carries a little bit bigger price tag solely because it's just in a more expensive area. And then Jefferson District Golf Course, going with the theme of crowded golf courses and areas. Jefferson District is a 9-hole short course. There's one par 5. All the par 4s are kind of right around that 250 to 305 mark. They're not very long. It doesn't have a range either. So it sits right in the middle of Falls Church. It is impressive. They actually fit a golf course into the space that it's in. But holes are super short. Does have a putting green, does have a chipping green, no range, but it is a perfect place to take kids and beginners. If you have a kid, especially under 12, taking them out there is the easiest place. Not extremely challenging at all. I think you can technically hit the par 5 in 1 if you can hit a 300-yard drive over the water, but it's fun. It's not in great shape ever, but it's super cheap. Probably the cheapest 9-hole course on this list, but it is fun to play. It's just not challenging, and it's pretty short. Flip side of that, we go to Laurel Hill Golf Club. Laurel Hill Golf Club is probably the most critically acclaimed public course in the Northern Virginia area. It is the premier Fairfax County golf course. It's hosted the U.S. Pub Links for the amateurs, so big amateur event that I think now is the U.S. Mid-Am. Very challenging, can play actually about 7,400 yards, I believe, from the back, and a ton of elevation change. It sits on what used to be the land that was farmland owned by the Lorton Penitentiary and Prison. So a lot of tall fescue, and actually some of the grain silos are still out there and added as accents to the course. It's a beautiful golf course, extremely challenging, a lot of bunkers out there as well. Wide fairways, but if you are off the fairway, you will probably lose the ball. But it's one of the nicest courses in the area. Heavy price tag with it, obviously. It sits in Lorton, Virginia. So a nicer area, stays very crowded, but it does have an amazing golf academy that sits right on it. It has a great range, has a great putting green, and also has probably the best chipping facility on this list. So the chipping area, actually you can hit as far as 50-yard shots into. So it's a great course. It's just, like I said, it's expensive compared to a lot of the other ones. Definitely sits up in that higher price tag, very similar to Bull Run, but this would kind of be one of the go-to picks for it as well. And then Old Hickory Golf Club. Old Hickory, fills the gap of the lack of courses in Woodbridge. So Woodbridge, Virginia, very popular area. A lot of people live there, but not a ton of golf. Only, I believe, one other course on this list is actually technically in Woodbridge. So this course stays crowded because of that. It's a pretty good course. I'd say kind of middle of the road architecture as far as design, middle of the road conditions as well. It's not great conditions. It's not a fantastic course. It's not super challenging, kind of plays around 6,800 yards at the most, but it's usually a good deal. They're not super expensive rates, even on the weekends. Like I said, it's a safe place to go. It's a good place to check out. It just, gonna be honest, it sits in a really good area for it, but compared to some of the other ones on this list, probably not the best value. But if you do live in Woodbridge, it's super easy. The Powhatan Bay Golf Course. Powhatan Bay is a very kind of tucked away golf course. It's also in Lorton, Virginia, but probably about a 10-minute drive from Laurel Hill, but I would say the complete opposite of it. It is probably, I would say, 6,500 from the back tees. A lot of dog legs, a lot of elevation changes. It's very tough to walk. You can walk it. It's really cheap if you do. Probably somewhere around $20 to $40 if you decide to walk. But like I said, it's just a much shorter course. It's usually in pretty good condition year round. Range, has a putting green, has a chipping green, tucked away in Lorton. Like I said, it's just kind of a lower price tier version of Laurel Hill. But contrary to that, it is very woodland course. There's no houses or anything on it at all. Every hole feels very isolated from the others, and everything's completely tree lined. If you are off the fairway a little bit, you probably will lose the ball. But like I said, having said that, there's not a lot of holes that you have to hit driver on, so it's pretty good. Then Potomac Shores Golf Club. I would consider this in kind of that upper tier, along with Bull Run, along with Laurel Hill. Very good golf course. It sits at the southernmost part of Woodbridge, so still out of the way for a lot of people. It's right off of 95 and in Route 1, but it's the newest course on the list. It was built in 2014. It's a Jack Nicklaus design. There are not a lot of houses or anything on the course, though they are starting to build a neighborhood around it. But even then, there's not a lot right off the fairways. It probably has the best practice area of any course on this list. And what I mean is, it doesn't have a great chipping green. The putting green's small, but the range itself sits away from all the other holes. You actually have to take a golf cart to get to the range. But the range has its own bathroom, it has its own water cooler and everything. And there's a putting green right behind it, and it's a massive grass range, big long continuous range mat for off-season play. It's just a really good place to just honestly put in headphones and spend an hour on the range and just really not see that many people, and have a putting green right behind you to get some putts in between shots. Course itself, very long, another one that can play over 7,000 yards, and big greens, a lot of sand traps, Jack Nicklaus design, but a lot of risk reward holes. That's one of my favorite things about it. There are some holes that are even drivable, even from the back tees if you're a longer hitter, and massive elevation changes. One of the par fives on the course, you hit probably 5 stories down, hitting towards the green on your approach shot. Great design, a lot of elevation changes, really fun to play. Just like I said, kind of in that upper price tier as well. So next one is Reston National Golf Course. So Reston National sits in the dead heart of Reston. Very similar to a lot of the other courses. It is very, I would say, more expensive than it should be for the course because it's in the heart of a city. The course itself is the only one really on here, besides another one we'll come to, that is kind of a neighborhood surrounded course, but plays a lot longer, plays up to 6,800 yards. The only downside we kind of saw with this, obviously price being a little higher than we kind of wanted. Like I said, in a populated area, it's going to be, so we know that. It just seemed a little bit boring to us. It has some elevation change, but a lot of the holes are kind of straight up, Another one that goes straight back, not a ton of curves or really interesting architecture. It does have a big short game area, big putting green, and it has a range, but the range is small. But it does have all of those. So it's a good course to check out in the city, especially if you're there and don't really have the time to go somewhere else. But it's like we said, on the downside, it wasn't the most interesting architecture to us. And then Raspberry Falls Golf and Hunt Club. So this one sits probably the furthest from DC in general, but it sits all the way in Leesburg. So basically, if you're not familiar with it, that's just almost straight west of the city. Maybe about 45 to an hour away. Gorgeous course, absolutely gorgeous. It sits in the mountains, kind of out in Leesburg, and actually a lot of the tee shots, you tee off from a really elevated position down to a massively downhill fairway. So the course itself actually measures about 7,200 yards, though it doesn't play like that. With the added elevation of being up in the mountains and with the added help of a lot of elevated tee shots, the course plays a lot shorter. But it is gorgeous. The views are probably the best of any course on this list, being views from the mountain. You can actually see the town of Leesburg. It's gorgeous. It's always in good condition as well. It's also in kind of that upper price tier with some of the other ones, but it's a great place to play. Even if you're just in the area and want to go play it occasionally, it's not close to a lot of other things, but it is, like I said, just really enjoyable round. It's actually the only Gary player design on this list as well. And then Stonewall Golf Club. Stonewall is a course in a busy area that carries a higher price tag, but is actually worthy of the higher price tag. It sits right on Lake Manassas. The Robert Trent Jones course, the private club, is right across the water from it, so you can actually see it on a couple of the holes. It's where they've played, some PGA Tour events and stuff. But Stonewall Golf Club itself is great architecture at a pretty fair price. It can be $100, but you can actually play there for as little as $40 if you get it on a weekday or twilight rate. So if you have the option to play it on those, totally worth the money. It can move very slow because it is a very popular course. Like I said, it sits in a neighborhood, though the neighborhood it sits in is a very wealthy neighborhood. So a lot of the houses are very large and sit pretty far back away from the course. But if anything, they actually kind of add to it, because a lot of the houses almost look like mini castles out there. But gorgeous course, worth the money if you get it at a good rate, but busy and probably a little pricey if it is kind of some of the other times of the year, like in season or during the weekend. Westfields Golf Club. So Westfields is kind of the last course in kind of that mid to upper price tier. Gorgeous course. It's a Fred Couples design. So if you are a drawer of the ball as a right-hander or a fader as a left-hander, basically if you have a right to left ball flight, you love the course. Most of the fairways and actually greens set up for that shot shape. That's what we found. However, it's just a fun course in general. It's sits back in the woods really well. So just gorgeous course to play and be a part of. Pretty decent elevation changes, not as severe as some of the others, but always in really good condition. Like I said, kind of also carries that it can be $100 to play, it can be $40 to play. It has a small short game area, really big range, great kind of custom fitting shop right on the range as well. But definitely one of our better picks. Like I said, it's in that category of Westfields, Stonewall, Potomac Shores, Raspberry Falls, and Laurel Hill. So I'm in that category. And then Twin Lakes Golf Course. So Twin Lakes is the epitome of public golf courses for the area of Fairfax. So sits right down the street from downtown Fairfax, probably about 10 minutes away. And it has two courses. It has the Oaks and the Lakes course. Oaks course, very woodland, very parkland style. The Lakes course, much more open and actually plays around the two lakes that are out there. So both courses are pretty fun to play. Both will measure somewhere around that 7,000 yard mark. But, just a lot of good variety. I love that the courses both play very different. Like I said, the Oaks course, very tight, very tree lined, and very similar to just the environment of Northern Virginia. If you do lose it in the woods, you probably won't find it. However, the Lakes course, wide open. You can hit it completely on a different fairway and you'll completely find it. So a lot of same thing as some of the others, a lot of amateur events, a lot of high school events are held out here. So it can be very busy even though they have two courses. Great rates, sits in kind of a lower price tier for rates, but it does have a big range, big chipping area, big putting green. The downside of this is conditions similar to like Augustine or Burke Lake can fluctuate pretty heavily. It's usually in pretty good shape, but gets a ton of play, so it can get beat up, especially kind of late afternoons on the weekends. A lot of ball marks on the greens. They do a pretty good job, but probably the most hit or miss conditions on the list. And then 1757 Golf Club. I actually used to be a member out here when I lived in that area as well. But 1757 is a practicer's paradise. It has massive putting green, huge double-decker coaching facility, and a massive range as well. It has a couple short game areas. There's a small short game area that sits off to the right side of the range. It also has a huge short game area right behind the putting green. That one typically is reserved for members, but the range is huge. Long continuous mat, tons of spaces, but even with a huge range, it still stays busy. Middle of COVID, when we saw it, you would have to wait for a space to hit. It does have a top tracer section of the range that you can rent out right next to the coaching facility, and actually members have another range they can use in the season that is a grass range as well. So like I said, a lot of short game areas, a lot of putting, big range, great place to practice, and a ton of targets out in the range as well. It also does have a massive clubhouse, great for kind of eating in, a lot of banquets for events, and really good grill room as well. If you're just kind of making the turn, stop in, and it's great. The course itself is very flat. It sits out in kind of towards Loudoun County, so basically that whole area is very lacking of hills unless you are up in the mountain area. But it's really cool that it's right by the Dulles Airport, so you do get to see planes flying over pretty frequently. If you find that annoying, you may not like it. But it has water on 14 of 18 holes. It's not super long. I wouldn't call it tight due to trees. It's tight because there's always water. There's multiple water hazards, multiple lakes and ponds, multiple kind of either cut-in streams as well. There's just a lot of water. If you are inaccurate off the tee, it's a lot of lost balls. Like I said, it is one of the courses you don't have to use a lot of longer clubs to play into the fairways. So there is that. It's always in pretty good shape. It's super easy to watch as well. So like I said, probably the best place to go or kind of look at if you love to practice, work on your game. You can spend an hour practicing and then you'll walk 9 holes, and it's a great place to do that. But that kind of wraps up our list. So thank you guys so much for watching again. Let us know. You can hit the link down below and you can go to our site. And you can also just kind of submit comments, ask us where you'd like to see some of the next course tours and reviews. Hey.